Hi, everyone. First, just a quick reminder that we are recording today's presentation and we do plan to share the recording in the future. Thank you for joining us in what is the final event of 3 virtual offerings in the Daemen College Speaker Series, hosted by Book Arts and led by faculty from Daemen College's exciting new Leadership and Entrepreneurship in the Arts program. My name is Nicole Cook, and I'm the Executive Director at the Western New York Book Arts Center. If this is your first time hearing about us, hello, nice to meet you. We are an arts and cultural nonprofit located in the heart of downtown Buffalo's literary corridor, devoted to printing and book-related arts. That includes everything from letterpress and screen print to bookbinding, origami, calligraphy, and more. We are the only publicly accessible studio of our kind in Western New York, and we eagerly welcome all ages and skill levels to come and engage your creative curiosity. I'm joined today by my Book Arts teammates, Melissa Ruckin, who you'll hear about more in just a little bit, and my co-host for this evening, Education Director Rosemary Williams, who will be running tonight's Zoom presentation. Please feel encouraged to ask questions at any point throughout today's event by typing in the chat box. Rosemary will interject as questions are raised, so your input helps to shape our discussion. Don't be shy, but do please stay muted. Today's presentation is the final in a series of 3 workshops hosted by Book Arts in partnership with Daemen College. Did you know that nationally, the arts and culture sector is an $878 billion industry and that the nonprofit sector accounts for 11.4 million jobs? We at Book Arts are strong proponents of workforce development in the creative sector, and Daemen's new Leadership and Entrepreneurship in the Arts program is such a unique opportunity for creatives working in a variety of media to sustain and support your practice as an independent business. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's incredibly well-credentialed speakers, Christina Francis and Emily Burns-Perryman. Christina, or Christy for short, is Research and Creative Director at Daemen College. She is an adjunct instructor for University of Buffalo's MA in Arts Management and an adjunct instructor for Daemen College's undergraduate course, Entrepreneurship in Action. In addition to her work with Daemen, Christy is the co-founder of Fresh Batch Insights, specializing in qualitative market research for organizations across a variety of industries. Her work is the foundation for compelling marketing, branding, and product development. Christy is an illustrator and a photographer. She owns and operates Avery and Harlow, an online art business named for her outrageously cute twin daughters. She holds a BS in Business Administration, concentration in finance, and an MBA from the University of Buffalo. Christy sits on the board of Massachusetts Avenue Project, a nonprofit urban farm on Buffalo's west side. Emily Burns-Perryman has 18 years of experience executing community relations, corporate communications, market, media relations, PR, government relations, and digital strategy. While working in the corporate US headquartered PR departments of global beauty and fashion companies like Avon Products, Christian Dior Couture, Giorgio Armani, and Jones Apparel Group, Emily oversaw strategic PR initiatives and events for the women's apparel, accessories, footwear, and beauty markets. In her last position in New York City as corporate communications manager for ID Media, Emily provided communications, PR, and media relations support for the agency's DRTV, online and emerging media channel services. After 10 years in the Big Apple, in 2008, Emily relocated back to her hometown here in Buffalo, New York. She currently serves as Vice President of Institutional Advancement at Daemen College. She is also a social change activist and helped co-found Unite by Night, a local nonprofit focused on diversity and inclusion. Emily is also a board member of the National Federation for Just Communities of Western New York and the Women's Foundation. Whew. Emily attended the SUNY Fashion Institute of Technology in NYC and obtained a BA in Advertising and Marketing Communications. She also completed an MA, Social and Public Policy with Empire State College. And while I'm sure we could do an entire presentation just on the amazing stories that these 2 ladies have to share with us today, let's get started. Emily and Christy, take us away.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, thumbs up. Okay, perfect. We are so excited to be here, and thank you so much for the introduction. Obviously, branding and discussion of all things creative is something that is, I know, so close to my heart and so close to Emily's heart. And so we're thrilled to be here. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen, which is always, I feel like, the highest pressure part of any one of these presentations. Okay. All right, how are we? Did we make it? Okay, good, we're good. Perfect. So to give everybody a little bit of an introduction on the thought process here, Emily and I both really, really enjoy, obviously, branding and marketing. And I think, and Emily, of course, feel free to jump in here. But I think branding has really undergone this very interesting evolution, especially recently. We've seen, all of these sort of new and emerging spaces in the past decade or so, primarily digital spaces, that I think has sort of pushed branding in this direction where, as we always say, it's so much more than a logo. Now it's an experience, right? It's how you make people feel. It's making sure that, brands, I think, are held accountable for their values, for the things that they believe, the people they're associated with. It's really become just this massive conversation at the center, really the center of all things for an organization. So it was really important to us. I think you hear brand often discussed in this context where you're talking about larger organizations, larger brands, right? Larger institutions. But everybody out in the world has to think about brand. You have to think about your personal brand. If you're running a small business, if you're an independent artist, brand is really a huge part of who you are. So that's kind of the conversation that we wanted to have tonight, just to give everybody a sense of what branding is, what its significance is, how you can think about it. And Emily, I don't want to, you feel free if you have something you want to add to that too.
Yeah, I think that Christy makes a good point that you'll often see when even searching the term brand or branding, you'll see the phrase brand is much more than just a logo. And it's going to be an interesting conversation because both Christy and I have kind of a diverse collection of experience having to do with the research side of marketing and the creative side of marketing, and also the public relations and communication side of things. And just like Christy mentioned, brand goes beyond just maybe an identity, a visual identity, but has to relate to a mission, or should relate to a mission and values and decisions pertaining to, what kind of collaborations one goes into, or who one aligns themselves with, or even how to manage a crisis. Those are all things that impact a brand and can build a brand. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation tonight.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. And of course, as we said, we're very, very excited to meet you. This is sort of just our, a little bit more information about where we are, what we do. As Emily mentioned, Vice President, Institutional Advancement at Daemen College, co-founder of Unite by Night, which I think we're going to share that link at the end, but is such a wonderful organization doing so much important work in the community. And I encourage everybody to take a look at that. And then I don't know how you fixed that, Rosemary, but thank you. I just saw that. Thank you. Thought maybe I had done it. I didn't know. And then, of course, I just want to take a moment to talk about this too, because I think this is something that I get a lot of questions on. But I am a research and creative director, and I think something that Emily and I also feel very, very passionate about, as she mentioned, is the research side of things, right? And where research fits in. And as we really think about, how brand has evolved, again, as a result in many ways of the digital space and social media, you have such an opportunity to really kind of go outside of your own organization, go outside of, the room that you make art in, and sort of understand how people perceive you, what their perspectives are on your brand, why it matters to them, where it fits within the context of their life. And I think that was something really important that we wanted to build into the presentation tonight. Something that maybe is considered more of a math oriented, right? Quant oriented, stats oriented.
That left side of the brain type stuff that some of us who are super creative get scared of.
It's not, yes, that's such a good point. It's not scary, right? It's a huge tool for you to use and for you to kind of, build your brand up with. So yes, Emily, the right and the left element of that, those two things can really complement each other. So we want to make sure we talk about that as well. All right, we're going to keep going here. We wanted to put this up front, okay? So as we mentioned, your brand is not just your logo, all right? It's the entire experience. And I think this applies, again, regardless of the size of your organization. It's about your website. It's about your social platforms, how reactive you are on those social platforms, right? That I think has been a very interesting evolution as well that we've seen. It used to be all about creating really beautiful, aesthetically pleasing content. Now it's a question of how are you building community, right, through your social media platforms? How are you talking to people? How are you answering their questions, right? What are you doing when they post about you in that space? And we've seen so many interesting things coming out of that. Your letterhead, your business cards, right? Any content that you develop, how your brand is woven through that in the physical space and also the virtual space. We talk about, events, who you choose to include in those events, who you collaborate with, right? The discussions that you offer, your perspective, your language, your tone. Brand is very interesting when you step back and start to think about how a bank or an insurance company talks to you versus a retailer, right? That's where you start to see a lot of those differences in tone. How you react to a PR issue, which Emily, I want you to elaborate on that piece because Emily has just a wealth of knowledge in that. So what would you kind of say about that part of it?
Well, I think, we've been actually living through probably for most of us, our lifetime's biggest crisis, a global pandemic. And that's been a really interesting, experience seeing how companies and brands have been reacting to that experience. So when we talk about things like public relations and crisis communications and how either a company or a brand might react to something that's difficult or negative, how they react, the words that they choose, that all matters, and it is a reflection of the company or brand. So a lot of thought has to go into things like reacting to maybe something negative, or figuring out how to navigate through a crisis situation while still remaining true to your brand. We also point out here, really thinking about the events that you hold, or the people or organizations that perhaps you choose to align yourself with. That all is very, or should be, a representation of your brand. And one of the things I like to give as an example is, as the nonprofit that I helped co-found got started in kind of like its infancy, or being a nonprofit startup, we were able to build some really good street credibility by very carefully and selectively choosing the people and organizations that we wanted to align ourselves with, or that we wanted to collaborate on things or projects. And that really helped kind of generate buzz about our organization, and get us earned media in the news, which of course was great. That's basically free advertising. So really getting people to think about, it's so much more beyond that visual identity. It's really about everything that you do as a person, a business owner, an artist, a member of an organization, and really having strategy behind everything that you do.
And Emily, this is a point that you made too, when we were talking about this presentation and the things that we kind of wanted to bring to the table in the discussion around not just looking at your brand and how people maybe perceive your brand directly, but understanding how you've influenced others, how you've influenced culture. And I think that when we get into some of our examples, we'll talk about that. But looking around and kind of seeing, how everything that's in your orbit, right, that's in the universe that you exist, how that maybe, changes or reacts to your brand and is influenced by it. So we look at all of these things, in the work that we do as tools and opportunities, each one of them individually, because certainly your brand may look a little bit different depending on, what you're putting out there, what you're working on. But collectively, and I can't stress this enough, right? Nobody, generally speaking, nobody is looking at your brand and breaking it up into pieces. Right? Nobody is looking at it and saying, well, who they are on Instagram is different than who they are when I call them directly, is different than the website, is, that is not generally how a brand is perceived. So even if functionally you maybe work somewhere where all of those things are operating, through different people, or you're outsourcing to an agency or a third party, you still have to think about how that whole experience looks for somebody who interacts with your brand. So all very powerful individually and collectively. I don't know if we said this earlier in the presentation too, but if anybody has questions as we go, please feel free to ask. We want this to be conversational. So, all right, we will keep going. We will not keep going. My computer, there we go. Okay. So this is a quote that when I teach, I always kind of share with my students. I think this is such a wonderful quote. So there is, I believe, a TEDx talk from Matthew Lunn about creating a feeling. And again, we talked about kind of that whole idea of left brain, right brain, and maybe, people who traditionally occupy those spaces professionally, that perception that they're different. But I think he does such a wonderful job really saying, these are not different things, right? We are all trying to tell a story. So no matter what you do in life, art, a startup, creating a company, make sure that you are leaving people with a feeling. And when you know what that feeling is, that becomes your North Star, right? That's your brand. That's that central piece that kind of brings everything together. So
Christy, I think a really good example to kind of reflect this way of thinking is taking a look at influencers. Influencers, the good ones, every day are really putting everything into telling that compelling story through, the photos they take, the places that they show off, the clothes that they wear. They're basically, curating something, and they're trying to curate something that tells that compelling story about themselves. And especially if you look at, let's say, travel or fashion and beauty influencers, so much time and attention is going into that. It's so well choreographed and it's so well produced because the intention is to tell that compelling story so that they can, gain followers and monetize themselves. So I just think that is such a fascinating aspect of branding, just influencer culture. Just kind of something that came to mind as we were talking about telling that compelling story.
Agreed. Absolutely. I think the spaces that you see influencers occupy and the way they demonstrate those things, and the partnerships that they form, right, and the spaces that they're able to enter because of that story that they're telling. It's tremendous. And again, I go back to earlier when we were talking about how so much of that has changed in the past decade. It's amazing to me to see a lot of that, or to see stores that are kind of licensing, things from influencers.
Influencer brand collaborations are just incredible. And kind of going back to, let's say, the PR perspective, or even the diversity and inclusion perspective, there's been a few examples of, influencers going wrong, doing something that maybe is not the right message that they wish to send out, or was offensive in some way. And then how do you come back from that? How do you, respond when perhaps you've damaged your brand? So again, a lot of thought needs to go into, and a lot of strategy needs to be a part of building that compelling story through visuals. So a lot of interesting examples floating out there of mistakes that have been made.
Yeah. Well, and that's something I think we'll talk about too in a second, Emily, because I love that point. I think it's really important to keep in mind that, you know, the process of branding is iterative, right? And we say that a lot, but you come out here, you tell a story, and it has to change. It's so right, like it has to reflect how people are changing, how culture is changing, right? You have to kind of reevaluate where you are in the context of all of that. So to your point, I think the expectation that you're going to go out the door and you're going to have brand 100% right, like don't put that pressure on yourself. Just accept you're not going to have it 100% right and be willing to be flexible and address those things that Emily raised. Okay.
Before we get into the next thing, we do have a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's do it.
So one quick question, it seems like a lot of pressure to compete with influencer culture. What if an emerging artist doesn't have the same tools, experience, or even monetary support as influencers, and how do they get seen on social media? And then another question, how do you identify what your story is based on what you have already? And I can repeat either of those.
Well, maybe I'll speak to the, the competition aspect. I think there's a lot to be learned simply from observation. So I always joke that at the end of the day, after, working a full-time job and then coming in and kind of clocking into the next full-time job of being a parent of 2 young children, when I'm done with that day, I literally just sit down and I veg out and I scroll. And, it's a little bit mind numbing, but at the same time, I learned so much and I observed so much that I can then apply to, the way that my organization markets. Just looking at how different bits of content are created, looking at different types of language that's used within social media, looking at different trends or challenges that I see pop up. Just seeing how different generations utilize those platforms and thinking to myself, how do I maybe scale that to what I wish to accomplish, either in my day job or in the nonprofit sector that I also work in. And you're right, a lot of influencers have a lot of resources, primarily financial, especially those that have paid opportunities where they're making obscene amounts of money per post. But, for those who don't have those types of things, I think, observing what people are doing and trying to think creatively how to scale it to what they wish to accomplish, checking out all kinds of free tools and resources that live online as far as how to, develop interesting, unique, entertaining, engaging content. I think we could probably pull together a really nice hit list of online tools or apps that are really helpful to kind of, inspire you how to create different things. And look to, the artists or the brands that you admire. And again, observe, see how they do it. And know that it's not a competition. It's that phrase, slow and steady wins the race. Taking a very carefully, thought out approach to things and coming at it from a strategic point of view, while also testing and trying stuff to see what works and what resonates with different audiences. That can kind of really help you a lot.
Yeah, Emily, that process of continuous learning that you just described, I think especially when you're kind of a little guy, right, in terms of your brand. How can you, there was a great example of this, and I think we have it in the presentation a little bit further down, where we'll talk more. But finding opportunities to cross promote, like Emily said, there's so many user-friendly tools out there. There's also, the opportunity, obviously, to follow hashtags on Instagram, or when you get tagged in a post, right, when you sell something to somebody at an art festival or wherever you are, and they go home and they put it on and they take a picture and share it on social media, you share it, right?
Yeah, it's like encouraging people to do the work for you.
User generated content is huge in that space. and you see where your product fits within that person's lifestyle, how they use it, what they want to do with it.
Yeah, you might see it, under a different lens that you hadn't considered. So yeah, encouraging user-generated content. If you're selling something or building something for someone, may inspire you to think about it or talk about it or, present it in a completely different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also owning your space, like that's the other thing, right? Like, don't come in and say, hey, what is everybody else doing in the art space? Think about the unique collaborations that you could look at, right? Or the places where nobody else is occupying that particular real estate. And don't try to serve everyone. Know who is interested in your product, know who is following you on social media. I would say kind of pick a platform that you can do a good job with, and just give that your all. Don't feel like you have to be on every platform, right? If you're an artist, Instagram might be a really, really great choice because you can show the aesthetics of what you work on and interact with other people. So I'll keep moving through this. I think we're like already over our time, book arts. So we're going to do our best here.
You're good. Thank you.
Sure. So think about this as a culture built through storytelling, right? And I think sometimes people ask me, well, how do I know? How do I know if I have a strong brand? And this is something that I think, a lot of people across fields are probably familiar with, but I say to them, well, can somebody else retell your story? Right? Like if you know your brand, right? You know what you want it to be. If you talk to somebody else and ask them to describe it, what do you hear? And are you sort of getting across the things you want to get across? So it's a good way.
A good example of this quickly too is from a nonprofit perspective. I sit on a couple different boards, and some of the board training that comes with that responsibility is understanding the organization and how to speak to its mission and vision really, really articulately. So there's a lot of training of board members so that they can, speak about the organization and its mission, and that helps, communicate the brand. So sometimes, you may find friends or followers who can kind of tell your brand story for you. So think about, clever and creative ways that you can arm them with talking points or resources to kind of help communicate your brand.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that idea. I think that's great. Okay, keep going here, hopefully. Okay, so this we can go through pretty quickly, okay? But what is branding? We've already touched on a lot of this, all right? So again, not just your logo, okay? There are visual elements, certainly, so you can think about your logo. You also need to think about your color palette. And I think a conversation that, Emily and I have had in the past too, think about how your color palette looks across platforms. The way it looks on your website might not be the same as how, something that you print looks in person. So really think about that distinct, that distinct visual language that you have.
And also think about how something like color palette can, again, go beyond visual identity. Like, I don't know if you can tell, but I happen to be wearing Daemen blue tonight. So I remember during my interview process at Daemen, I intentionally chose a Daemen blue outfit because I had to make a huge presentation in front of a committee because I wanted to establish myself as part of that Daemen brand before they even hired me. And I kind of take that with me when I go on speaking engagements or I have to do a big presentation, at the college. I want to visually represent the brand. So that's just something really simple that can be very, very effective.
Yes, absolutely. And I think now I feel kind of bad I don't have Daemen blue on. Sorry. And I think, Emily raises a great point too around just the impression of imagery in general. So how does that language of color really start to, present itself through illustrations, through photography, through the textures, on your website, all of these different things, right? All of them help tell that story. Tone, what do you sound like, right? We already kind of touched on that, but when you're talking to people, I always think great examples of tone. Look at how fast food brands talk on Twitter. Okay, like that's a very like sort of an extreme example of where you can really see what tone looks like within a brand. And then,
or even tone in relation to customer service. You know, how you respond to maybe an inquiry or a problem, making sure that the tone that you're utilizing within your brand kind of translates in lots of different ways that you may communicate with people.
yes. And that is like also, I think, such a great sort of connected piece to your ideas and your beliefs. Like to Emily's point, if you present yourself as a brand that has a certain set of values, the way that you talk to people, the way that your customer service looks, again, how you collaborate, how you choose to present yourself. I mean, those ideas and beliefs are very much connected. And as we talked about before too, it's all consistent, okay? Like nothing that you do, the way that you interact with people, none of that is in a silo. Every single touch point is connected. So think about what that experience is like for people who interact with you. Okay, Emily, I know you're gonna have so many interesting things to say about this. So, so one of my absolute favorite examples of what branding looks like is Chanel. I think so many times we talk a lot about startups, we talk about, young organizations. I understand, Chanel is obviously very large. They've been around for a very long time. But when you see how the people who, are part of Chanel interact with each other and how really deeply ingrained that sense of brand is, you start to kind of understand what it looks like when brand really is that guiding light, right? That northern light, which we heard described earlier on.
And
So,
let me give a really good example of, translating the brand into everything that's done. I recently ordered, a lip gloss, a little teeny little lip gloss from Chanel.com. And the packaging that I received this little teeny little lip gloss in was beautiful. It was just so perfectly packaged in a gift box with tissue paper and a branded sticker and a little note. And it's, it's that experience of getting something, purchasing something from the brand. And, that experience is somewhat similar to the experience that you may have if you purchase something in the boutique. It's that customer experience. Well, I had something similar when I received my package, here at home, and I got to unbox it. It was special. So, just think about all the different ways that they're trying to translate their brand. And Christy gives some really good examples here on the PowerPoint.
yeah, the experience piece of it. And the fact, I mean, if you really think about the fact that, a product like that comes from somewhere else, okay, shows up in your house, and that experience in your house is representative of the brand. I mean, that is such a powerful thing. So I'm sure everybody can probably take a look at this and kind of read through these quotes, but this is from a documentary from a few years ago, 7 Days Out, and it was just sort of this documentary that detailed all the planning and process that went into their fashion show. And you could hear people at all different levels. They're listed here, right through to the person, designing the set decor, the ushers at the runway show, right? You hear all of these bits of their brand that are so important, like the way they describe colors, pink powdery colors, old roses, gray, frosted lemons, right? And you can hear them all sort of coming back to the vision of the person who is at the center of it all, right? So I think, this is just, again, like if you have a second, if you have Netflix and you want to go look it up and watch how this all works, what a great example of brand. So, okay, we'll keep going here. How do you know that it's so strong? So this was something that Karl Lagerfeld said during the presentation during the documentary that I thought was really powerful. When I started the line, everything was completely new. I have a tight, precise concept and I stay with it, right? And that really comes back to that first quote that we saw early on in this presentation. Everybody's working around that vision. And
what's funny is he's taken that now that he's not associated with Chanel any longer and has moved certain things over to his own brand. If you take a look at his apparel accessories, there's a lot of elements that are very similar to what you would see with Chanel, you know, quilted leather, gold and black stripes, you know, the black big sunglasses. So it's kind of interesting how it's almost as though he's capitalized on his time at Chanel and then transitioned over to his own thing, but how, you know, how much has come on over with him, because Chanel is such a strong brand and you can almost get a taste of it by now buying, you know, his stuff, which is, you know, slightly less expensive, actually a lot less expensive. So that's kind of an interesting, you know, look at brand.
Yeah, and that's, go ahead. Were you saying something else?
Quick question. Someone wants to know what the documentary is called again. Is it 7 Days Out? I'll pop it in the chat.
Yeah, I think it's just called 7 Days Out, and there's a series of events that they're a week out from that they document. And Chanel is one of them. So
thank you.
yeah, sure. Okay, so Emily just made a wonderful point, and we wanted to make sure that we kind of you know, again, touched on that feeling of influence, right? And how a brand can shift culture. So it was very interesting, you know, if you just Google this, like all of the different things that Coco Chanel kind of popularized, right? Trousers on women, the little black dress, you know, the Chanel suit.
Staple items. These have become staple items just in, you know, women's fashion.
Yeah. And here we all are, and we're, you know, we just kind of, these are a part of our life, how we dress, how we express ourselves, and it's really permanently shifted the culture. So I think this is just a great example. Emily, I don't know if you have anything else you would add here. You have such great examples from your background.
Well, I saw in the chat that somebody was interested in any other documentaries or sources showcasing great branding. I wouldn't say that this is specific to branding. However, one amazing and thought-provoking documentary that I recently saw is called Fake Famous. It's on HBO. And it's basically a documentary where some filmmakers take just some normal, you know, people and they turn them into influencers. And they show what goes into that. And I just found it really fascinating because they took these, you know, seemingly nobody people from a, you know, from a casting, and they curated an identity for them online and turned them into influencers. It was really, really interesting.
Okay, perfect. So what does this mean for you? Okay, so like what's really going to help you understand your brand? And we've touched on a lot of this already, but do your research and do it honestly. Do it fearlessly. Okay? So I think sometimes there's that temptation there in research to kind of validate maybe what you already think, or maybe make it a little bit overly positive, right? So think really hard about how you can engage people who maybe are not huge supporters of your brand yet, who still have questions, right? How can you find people who, again, are sort of in the orbit of your brand online, and what can you learn from them? Be really, really responsive. Pay attention, even to conversations that you are not starting. Early on, I remember when, I remember, I'm dating myself, but I remember when social media was just becoming a thing, okay? And I think in some rooms, people were saying things like, well, we're just not going to do it. We're just not going to do social media. We're not going to be part of it. Nope. Like obviously that's not how it works, right? But if you are not part of the conversation about you, that's, you know, you're missing it. Okay. Like that conversation.
I mean, unless that's part of your brand.
I'll say that if you're like a speakeasy or something hidden under a bakery, and maybe that's your thing, right? But I don't know, somebody probably still has a Yelp review on you somewhere. So, you know, keep in mind, you want to be part of that. And then again, look carefully and creatively for collaboration opportunities with others. So don't be intimidated by research. It can be simple, right? It can be a conversation. It can be you reaching out to 5 people who seem to really love your brand. It can be you reaching out to somebody who had something to say about your brand that maybe wasn't so great.
I mean, it can be as simple as taking a look at your last 10 to 20 posts and, you know, assessing which performed best and trying to understand maybe what was similar about those posts, and, you know, hypothesize what kind of content might resonate best with people.
Yes, absolutely. Emily, that's such a good point too, because you know, we talk a lot about conversions, right? And trying to move away from if anybody's familiar with the term vanity metrics, okay? So you might put something out there that gets a lot of likes. That's cool, right? But did the people who liked your post actually buy something from you as a small artist because they saw it. So think
Or did they share it?
Did they share, right? Did they share it? Did they help you build your network, right? So that conversion piece, what your goals are and how people are sort of reacting to how your brand presents itself, those are really important things to keep in mind. Okay. So these are a few recent examples from Book Arts, who is awesome at this user-generated content thing. Pop Shop Jewelry, another great small business. And I believe AVA Collective, I'm not exactly positive how they pronounce the name, but you know, it was like the second that you put content up, these organizations, right? Oftentimes individuals. Pop Shop Jewelry is, you know, she is an artist. I think she's from Rochester. She was at a recent pop-up event. I posted a picture of earrings. The minute I posted it, she wrote me the nicest note on Instagram and then reshared the content, right? So again, like encourage people to be part of the brand. Track user-generated content. Check your hashtags. If somebody tags you, take a look at it. There are so many things that you don't have to spend your time doing if you really engage a strong community to promote your brand. Collaboration and partnership. And this is something that at Daemen, you know, we really spend a lot of time thinking about. We, I think we may have people on the call here who are kind of familiar with our approach, but we certainly try very, very hard to show images of people who are a part of our community. That might mean businesses, right? We developed Wildcat ice cream with our neighbor, Sweet Jenny's, okay? Do you expect a college and a small ice cream business to collaborate? Probably not, but you know what? We probably share a lot of the same people, right?
And it was so Instagram friendly because of the ice cream color.
Oh my gosh, it's blue. And like, who doesn't like to talk about ice cream? And there were people asking as they showed up, hey, what's Wildcat ice cream, right? So people who didn't know about our brand are asking questions because of this. And it's in a space, again, that is sort of outside of what you would generally expect to see. So we did a window takeover with Book Arts, which was so much fun.
Also very Instagram friendly.
Also, yes, very Instagram friendly. And then we worked with, if anybody is familiar with Braid Babes locally, to basically put together this great event for students. And we have all that photography that we can use in marketing. Students feel connected to it. The community feels connected to it. We're building an experience and we want to make sure people feel like they're part of that.
And we're doing it in a much different way than typically higher ed does. I think in this way, we're meeting our prospective students and our current students truly where they're at. And we're thinking beyond the typical higher ed marketing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think when you think about brand, again, this is something that I believe very strongly in, right? When somebody looks at our brand, they should know it's our brand. You shouldn't be able to swap logos with somebody else, and your brand, how you present yourself, looks just like everybody else. It's really important that you're able to differentiate yourself in your space.
And that's especially hard here in Western New York with 21 other higher ed institutions locally. So I'm very proud of these collaborative and creative means of kind of getting Daemen out on people's radar.
Absolutely. And Emily, that's another thing. I didn't put this in the presentation, Emily, but Emily is a person who champions this, who champions collaboration, who champions creativity. And especially as a small artist, or an independent, you need to find people who believe in that, who believe in you and believe in what you're doing. So find those champions out in the community. Again, don't limit yourself. Look for those collaboration opportunities. Look outside your industry, okay? Just because somebody else who sells something similar is approaching things one way, do something different. Be the guy that tries something else. And if it doesn't work, try another thing, all right? It doesn't have to be perfect. So differentiate, commit to that culture of continuous learning with your brand, okay? Test your ideas. I mean, you can literally put, I don't know, a few different examples of an ad that you might have built yourself into a survey. Send it to your friends and family. What do they like best? What does it make them think of, right? Look at all of these little research opportunities to test your brand. Okay. Okay, I think we're at the end. And unless, Emily, do you have anything to add here? I'm so sorry. We're like flying through.
No, just, as Christy mentioned, I'm all about collaborative opportunities and I'm all about connecting people to find new opportunities. So if you have questions or, you think of something later on or you want to learn more, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I think that's a great space, to make connections with one another, ask questions, and I am more than happy to connect with you there.
And so am I. I'm also on LinkedIn. You'll be able to find us because we're always posting about each other.
Yes.
So we're that, Emily and Christy. And of course, happy to answer questions afterward. I know we want to make sure we give book arts some time to talk. So
Good. Christy, I'm gonna stop sharing your screen.
perfect.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. I'm gonna
Sure.
thank you both so much. I'm sure there'll be more questions. I'm gonna pop it over to Nicole though, briefly introduce Mel, and then we'll have some fun. Oh, here we go. All right, perfect. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Emily and Christy. That was really awesome and such an interesting insight into sort of like what is a brand? I think it's something you hear this word all the time, branding, but I think for a lot of us, we have to take a step back and say, okay, it's the vibe, right? But how is that achieved, And it really does become sort of a philosophical question. So I think this was a really excellent overview of all the various components that go into the thought process you need to have before you even consider designing a logo. So I think this was super insightful and really helpful. And branding is kind of a lifelong pursuit for independent artists, right? When your work is your business, you're going to be growing and evolving, and so will your brand and so will your work. So I think continuously revisiting these concepts is also a great idea. So we might potentially run over time just a little bit, and that's okay because we have so much great content. Rosemary is dropping links in the chat for anybody that does maybe need to jump off early, but we hope that you'll stick with us for just a few extra minutes so that the amazing Melissa can go over some information about book arts branding. Melissa, who goes by Mel for short, implements and oversees book arts communications and outreach, preparing press releases, marketing materials, e-newsletters, and social media engagement. Plus, Mel is our shop superstar who runs our brick and mortar and online stores, supporting the work of more than 100 artists. Mel?
Hi, friends. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to Christy and Emily. That whole talk was just like amazing. And I took so many notes. And I think it's really important to note that I struggle with this personally. I think a lot of artists do, is that I struggle with like the feeling of perfectionism and like wanting to be perfect all the time and wanting to make sure what we're putting out there from the brand of book arts is like the right thing to do. And I thought that your note on, the evolution of branding and that everything's changing and it's okay to just like try things to see what will work really resonated with me. So I think that's a great point for a lot of artists out there. So yeah, I'm just gonna briefly, I know that we're a little like running late, but I'll just briefly talk about the book arts brand because back in 2019, a couple of years ago, Book Arts actually went through an entire rebranding process. And so we went through a lot of exercises similar to what Christy and Emily had to say about identifying core values, identifying tone, just identifying like who we are, what our vibe is, as Nicole mentioned, and then being able to identify those things so that all of our visual branding and the experience that we present to our current audience or future audiences as all reflective of that brand. So you can see here that I'm sitting in our workshop space here in the center. And this fun little, we call it our rainbow argyle pattern, is behind me here. And this is actually a design that can be found on our website, on our homepage. So we were lucky enough back in 2019 when we started our rebrand to work with Telesco Creative Group and the Brew Room, who helped us develop a logo. Our new website, which is actually a award-winning Gold Addy Award, the American Advertising Awards, and we won a gold in 2020, which we're very proud of, and we say all the time. So this can be found on our website, and it's something that we have started to carry through in all of visual representations, or pretty much all of our brand. So you can see it here in our space. It's also down in our studio. It's on some of our internal documents, our letterhead. It's in our store as secondary branding colors that we have as part of our logo. So something like this is such a visual representation of our brand that evokes the core values that we were able to identify. So sorry that I'm jumping around a little bit. I'm trying to like parse this down into something quickly, but we were able to discuss back in 2019, we kind of took that seat back as to what Christy and Emily had mentioned of like gaining perspective from outside of who we are. And we were able to really sit down and say like, who are we and what our values are. And because having a sense of community and giving opportunities to artists and you know, honing this craft of letterpress printmaking and bookmaking, we were really able to establish those key components of what book arts is, and then in turn work with Telesco Creative to develop a visual representation alongside that was able to evoke that experience, as well as bring pockets of those in all areas that we represent. So on our social media, in our space here, in the workshops that we host, really any ways that we interact with the public. Just running through my notes. So, and I just want to note too that because I'm rushing through this, if you wanted to learn more about just exactly how our brand was created, we do have a blog post with a really nice note from Telesco Creative Group that we worked with on exactly the parts of our logo and website and how they were identified. So even down to like the typefaces that were chosen and the actual look of the logo, it's really interesting to learn insight of how we established a brand based on our core values and how that was represented in our logo from Telesco. And yeah, so I also just want to say that I'm so sorry. I lost my notes and I have to log back in.
No worries. At this point too, if folks want to put any questions in the chat, we have about 5 or so minutes for some questions. So whether they're for Mel or Emily or Christy, please do so. We've been getting a lot of love in some love with the direct messages in the chat. So thank you. Oh, too fun. Awesome. Perfect.
Okay.
No worries.
My computer like turned off completely, so I'm just gonna wing it. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, please let me know. Again, we worked with some great people on our brand, and all of that, it can be seen obviously back here in the space that I'm in, as well as the way that we communicate on social media, as we communicate in our email campaigns. It really just is about honing back to those core values and establishing that experience, like what Christy and Emily had mentioned, so that no matter where somebody finds your brand, whether it's somebody finding you on Instagram or coming into the shop or out at an artist market, they'll be able to recognize like, I've seen you before, or when they head to your Instagram after meeting you, they can understand all of the inner workings of how your brand was created and who you are and what you represent.
And that's a good reason to make sure that your name is identifiable for people who want to be able to find you later on.
Yes.
I just wanted to add too, I don't know, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I have to just say, Book Arts, you do such a tremendous job, like living and breathing your brand. I mean, I brought my children in to screen print a towel with you guys for Mother's Day, and the way that you explain the process to them, the level of education that you clearly have about, your craft and the things that you're doing. I mean, just in the way that you talk, interact, present yourselves. I mean, it all connects so clearly back to that awesome, as Emily put it, just warm, relatable, brand. So I just have to say, like, you guys are awesome. There's a lot we can all learn from you about brand.
And I think that's important too, because we kind of discovered when we went through the exercises during our rebrand is that like we're such a niche organization, and what we do is so different, and you can really only explain it visually, because it's really hard to express just like the nuance of printmaking and of bookmaking and what that is and what that means. And so we really tried to establish even just like phrases or just the way that we speak about ourselves, the way that we speak about the process, and be able to, accurately engage folks who have no idea what book arts is, and then be able to express and explain to them in ways that are both interactive and visual.
Adding some things in the chat. Awesome. All right. Well, I don't know if there's any last minute questions. Wendy and I were chatting about it's time consuming, but I just want to say one little thing in that I'm not a designer. I'm not a great brand person, but once we made all the branding, it was so much easier for me to like put out information about workshops and, and things that I do. So yeah, it just like, instead of me trying to come up with some Photoshop thing, it was like, boom, it's already almost done for me. So it does save time if you put the tools in place.
I do want to say too on that note, I know a lot of us here are artists and visual people, but a lot of us don't have experience working in like Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop or a lot of those digital content creating platforms. So I can put in the chat here, there is a platform called Canva, which is really simple, and it's a really great way to import your logo or any of your other visual elements, and you can create like anything from there, whether it be branded social media stories, social media posts themselves with text on it, even like physical marketing collateral, like brochures or business cards. So for those of you who don't have the resources where an agency can create those things for you, Canva is great, and it's a free site that you can create all those branded materials.
I love Canva, and I have to say, so another one that we use too is PictoChart, and that I think functions very similarly to Canva, but yeah, especially when you're a small business and you really maybe can't afford to go outside of yourself to do that work. There are so many user-friendly tools out there that are so helpful. So I love that Canva recommendation.
All right, well, I'm gonna pop it over to Nicole. Come on.
I love all of this conversation about tools that are readily available. And the other thing I would add to that dialogue is just to remember that if you find artists who are doing branding really well, they probably want to talk about it because it's probably something they spend a lot of time thinking about. I mean, I don't want to necessarily volunteer any of our other speakers here, but I love nerding out about branding. So if somebody were to email me and be like, hey, I just put together my website, can you tell me what vibe it gives off? I would love nothing more than to tell you about your vibe. So, for someone like me who, I mean, I was a marketing professional even before I entered the nonprofit world. I know Mel spends a lot of time working with our retail artists on their independent branding. Emily and Christy, we all get together and nerd out about who's doing what. That ice cream thing was amazing. So don't be afraid to lean on your community and ask for help in that way too. Not necessarily asking somebody to sort of do the work for you, but just to help get that conversation going and help you figure out what direction to head in next.
And I think too, now that we're, knock on wood, heading more towards having in-person opportunities, don't discount going to a gallery opening or, checking out an outdoor event or, any number of different opportunities to kind of gather socially and maybe go a little bit outside your comfort zone and talk to people. And you're right, Nicole, people love to talk about their art. So, think about places and spaces that you can go and interact with people and start those conversations. You never know who you're going to meet or what you're going to learn or who you might be collaborating with next.
So on that note, I'm going to close us out. Thank you everyone so much for hanging out for a few extra minutes. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much to our speakers this evening, Emily and Christy and Mel. You all are amazing and we've all learned so much this evening. And thank you to all of our participants for joining us in what is the final of 3 virtual offerings in the Daemen College Speaker Series, hosted by Book Arts and led by faculty from Daemen College's Leadership and Entrepreneurship at the Arts program, dedicated to advancing leadership opportunities in the arts. We encourage you to sign up for our email list and to stay up to date on all of Book Arts artist opportunities, which certainly don't end when this event comes to an end. And that includes our upcoming Summer of Book Fest, which is kicking off July 10th, sponsored by Daemen College. We are also open in person 3 days a week, so we hope that you will stop by and say hello. And finally, please keep an eye on your email for a survey following the end of this event. Everyone who fills out the survey will receive a coupon code for 10% off in our online store, as mentioned previously, as well as being entered to win a giveaway for a Book Arts membership. So thank you all so much and have a great rest of your evening.